Hi guys, it's Nick. Welcome back to my channel. So today we are talking about one of my favorite interior design styles, which is called Japandi. Now, Japandi is a bit of a blend between Japanese Zen and Scandinavian style, and it kind of combines into this just really beautiful, serene, relaxing space. So this is part of a series of my interior design sort of deep dives. This is where I go into different specific interior design styles, in this case Japandi, and I talk a little bit about where those styles come from, the benefits of those styles, who this style is for, who this style is not for, as well as I give you some of my favorite retailers and different places that I think you can buy some of the products that will fit with this design style so that you can bring this all together in your own home. And remember, like is the case with all of these interior design styles videos, I'm doing these because I want you to draw inspiration for your own home. So don't never think that you have to like copy paste everything that you see in this video to have something that's like signature Japandi. You can just make it your own. Take inspiration, find something that you can use, maybe to combine some of these elements to create your signature space. So first, in order to understand Japandi, we need to talk a little bit about what is Japanese Zen and then what is Scandinavian. So Japanese Zen really focuses on a few things. First of all, there is a lot of really simple, clean furniture pieces. Generally, things are kept quite low to the ground. Things are generally quite simple, basic cubes, basic shapes. The color palette tends to be a little bit darker, which we're gonna get to when we talk about Scandinavian in a second. And it tends to embrace like a lot of really earthy tones. You're seeing a lot of like beautiful reds or like a rust or browns or beiges, a little bit of green, maybe some olive, jade, these types of colors being brought into the space, as well as some medium to dark wood tones. So this use of dark colors and earth tones is really meant to evoke sort of a feeling of simplicity, of really zen, very tranquil space that's going to be really, really beautiful and relaxing and comfortable. Japanese Zen also really utilizes a concept in Japan called Wabi, Sabi, which is basically this embracing of things that are imperfect, things that are not permanent, things that are maybe broken but then put back together in a really beautiful way. So just really seeing beauty in imperfections, which I think is gorgeous and wonderful and amazing and something that we should all encourage in our own home, because if you think about it, Mother Nature or outside, it's generally not perfect, right? Trees don't grow in a straight line, rivers don't flow in a straight direction, everything sort of moves around and is fluid and it's organic, and that's what the Japanese style really embraces. Scandinavian style, on the other hand, is similar to Japanese Zen in terms of the simplicity of the shapes of the furniture. This is very modern. We're not dealing with a whole lot of ornamentation. If you want more in depth on Scandinavian, I have a video specifically about Scandi, but also Scandinavian tends to use a much lighter color palette. And that's really the biggest difference, I think, between Scandinavian and Japanese Zen, is you're dealing with a much lighter color palette. So really light flooring, light furniture, but still using some of those really basic shapes that we saw in Japanese Zen. Now with Scandinavian, what we're trying to do here is create a space that is really light and open. So basically Scandinavian countries, like where I live here in Canada, it tends to get really dark really early in the day. So in order to maximize that light, we want, not a lot of window treatments and just really letting the light coming in and brightening up the space with a lot of white and a lot of really natural tones and a lot of neutrals to basically create a space that feels really light and airy. And also, if you want to learn a little bit more about Scandinavian, I also recommend really just diving deep and learning about, and I'm gonna pronounce this wrong, forgive me, but it's a Danish word and it's called Hygge. It looks like Hygge, don't make that mistake. It's Hygge, I think. And that basically just means creating a space that's really cozy and comfortable. I don't know if there's necessarily a direct English translation, but that's kind of the rough sort of take on it. I'm gonna link to a couple of books, by the way, if you wanna learn more about Wabi Sabi, a little bit more about Hygge, because I think these two concepts, I can't really do them justice in this video, so it's really important just to learn a little bit more, because these are not just things that are about design. These are things that are also part of cultural traditions that I think you really kind of need to respect. So there is definitely a lot of depth to these concepts that are not going to be in this video, but it's just kind of important to know those two things as we move forward to design the beautiful, perfect Japandi space for you. So the Japandi style really sort of combines these two styles in a really beautiful way. And the benefits of this is that you're creating a really beautiful, calming, serene place, but at the same time, it's also usually quite light and quite airy. So it sort of borrows from, I don't want to say the best of both worlds, because both of those styles are beautiful in their own way, but it just sort of combines it and it just makes Zen feel really light and fresh, kind of leaning on the Scandinavian vibe, but it makes Scandinavian also maybe embrace a little bit more of those earthy tones and a little bit more of that kind of organic imperfection that you see in Japanese Zen. So that's what Japandi is known for. So now let's talk about who Japandi is not for. I would say if if you're generally a person that likes really big pops of color, so if you like bright blues and yellows and reds and greens and purples and pinks and whatever, generally Japandi, you're gonna see a much more muted color palette. You're gonna see a lot of whites and a lot of neutrals with little pops of sort of toned down color choices, especially earthy tones. So if you want those big wow pops of color, probably look elsewhere. Also, if you tend to be a big fan of traditional design, things that have a lot of ornamentation, a lot of detail, I would generally avoid the Japandi style. I mean, look, you can get creative and add your own things if that's what you're looking for, but the Japandi style is really working with both Scandinavian and Zen. Generally really love sort of clean, modern, stripped down pieces of furniture. So it really is creating that relaxed, serene sort of room. And in order to do that, you sort of lean on really simple, basic shapes. So although I love like metallic geometric wallpaper, I'm not necessarily sure that this is the design style that's going to embrace that. Now, having said that, like I said at the beginning of the video, you can do whatever you want in your space, but I'm just saying that's probably less likely to fit in Japandi style. Okay, so let's get to how you can design your beautiful Japandi home. Okay, so here are my 5 tips. The first tip I have for you is to really keep it simple. So this means that we're using simple furniture with basic shapes. It also means that both of these styles tend to be minimalist styles. So that means generally we're not gonna see a whole lot of clutter. Furniture is gonna be fairly simple. We're trying to just keep it really clean and modern. We're not trying to do anything that's super traditional or super sort of crazy with lots of ornamentation, right? So I would say keep it simple both in your furniture, but also just in like the amount of space that you have or the things that you're putting in your space. Think more like a minimalist in order for this style to really work for you. Be really, really intentional in the decor pieces that you're gonna bring in. Okay, so tip number 2 is use of woods and neutrals in your space. So wood tones, as I kind of mentioned earlier, I think is one of the biggest differences between the Japanese Zen style and the Scandinavian. So I think you can really play with contrast here. What's really cool about Japandi is that I would say the color palette or the woods tend to be a lot lighter. So typically favor a little bit more of a Scandinavian look in terms of the wood choices. So things like oak and things like that. So generally things like playing with like light oak floors, but then maybe adding in more earthy tones, bringing in sort of reds or greens or blues, just really sort of bringing those into the space can provide a really lovely contrast with really light oak flooring. So definitely, although the Scandinavian side of this style typically favors more on the lighter side, feel free to bring in some more muted earth tones as well to bring in that little bit more of a Japanese feel. And don't forget to really layer in those neutrals. So neutrals are just a fantastic way of creating a space that's really kind of maybe doesn't have those big pops of color like we were talking about earlier, but what neutrals can really do, especially if you layer on different tones, it creates a space that's really calming and relaxing. I think sometimes we don't realize that we're dealing with really big pattern or really big color. It can be quite draining on the senses, and I think this is something that Japandi does really, really well, is it just makes a space that evokes that feeling of calm and comfortable, because generally you're layering in lots of different tones of neutrals. And that sort of, again, is borrowing from both of those design styles. Okay, tip number 3 is to use muted colors. So what I think is really interesting is, and you're seeing this evolution in the Scandi style as well, is that we are seeing more of an introduction with Japandi being so popular now of bringing in those earthy tones and bringing in just like really muted colors. So again, we're seeing like those soft pastels of greens and blues, because you don't want anything that's too saturated, because again, that saturated pigment that you're going to get from those really bold colors is quite energizing to the eye, and so it can really like kind of give you a lot of energy. But what we're trying to do with this space is create something really calming. So you're going to see, yes, you can use some color. You can use beautiful greens or blues or reds or oranges. Again, leaning more into the earthy tones is maybe ideal because to borrow from that sort of Japanese influence. But at the end of the day, you're really looking for muted color choices, things that are really toned down, because through those muted color choices, you're still going to create a space that's visually interesting, that's got those colors, but at the same time is sort of quite muted and calming. So it's kind of that connection of adding in color, but doing it in sort of a really subtle way. Okay, tip number 4 is the frequent use of natural materials. Now I love this. I'm a big fan of natural materials myself in design, and you're definitely seeing this in Japandi because again, you're borrowing from both styles that favor natural materials. So things like rattan, caning, stone, concrete, wood, obviously. I mean, lots and lots of wood, that just makes sense. But even like cotton and linen, things that are just really natural. Yeah, I would stay away from things like plexiglass or lucite. just any of the plastics, like just generally stay away from those things. Big bold mirrors, like this is not the time to bring out that glam mirrored furniture, right? That is not the feeling of calm serenity that we're trying to create with Japandi. So I would say any of the really kind of loud, especially man-made materials, throw those aside. We're bringing in lots of natural materials because you're trying to bring that really natural, calming, relaxing atmosphere into your space. Okay, tip number 5, and I think this is my favorite tip, to be honest with you, is it doesn't have to be perfect. So I love this about the Japanese Zen style. Again, we're bringing in that kind of Wabi Sabi sort of interpretation of design. So we're seeing things like bowls that are maybe cracked and had to be kind of mended back together. So beautiful lines and cracks that exist in those things. Things like if you're gonna put a pot, it doesn't have to be a perfect, beautiful ceramic pot. It can maybe be one that's a little bit lumpy or misshapen. It's beautiful in its own way. I think here what's key is looking at quality, not quantity when it comes to, and we're gonna get to the retailers that I really enjoy in a second here, but the quality, not quantity is the Japandi way. So you're talking about, you know, you're not getting a whole lot of clutter like I mentioned earlier. You're keeping things really simple and really serene, but you are embracing handcrafted pieces. Things that are not necessarily perfect because they're not coming off of a manufactured assembly line. These are things that, if possible, are handcrafted, things that are hand woven, things that kind of feel special because although they might not be perfect, they're unique and interesting, and there's beauty in that. And I think that really sort of feels very Japandi, right? So bring in those kind of broken pots, bring in those sort of misshapen bowls, things that, it doesn't have to be perfectly round. Things like if you're gonna bring in wood, like bring in things with knots or things that have maybe splits in them and you kind of had to sort of bring them back together, or anything that is imperfect is beautiful. So that's something that you see a lot in the Japanese Zen style that is definitely brought in and really internalized here in the Japandi style too. Okay, so now let's get to my favorite places to buy Japandi style. Where are the retailers that you can shop? Now this was actually really, really hard. If you've seen my other videos, it's generally easy to find like where to find mid-century modern pieces or Scandi or whatever. But Japandi I find is really interesting because again, there's that focus on quality, not quantity. So the first thing that I would look for is supporting local artists in your area that have really gorgeous, beautiful handcrafted pieces that you can bring in. So I found one here where I live in Vancouver. Her name is Janica Larson. She doesn't really know I'm doing this, but there you go. And she does these really beautiful ceramics. She does these gorgeous bowls and different mugs and plates and all sorts of things. And they're just gorgeous. And they're not necessarily perfect, right? This is not the IKEA 365 plates, although there's nothing wrong with those either. These are the plates that have been done, handcrafted by someone who really has taken the time and attention and care into producing something that might not necessarily be as perfect as a machine can pump out. It's beautiful because it's handcrafted, because it's unique and interesting and different than what you're gonna see from an assembly line. Also, by the way, if you're more skilled than I am, feel free to make this stuff yourself. If you think that you can take a local pottery class at your local community center and you can make your own pots, like go have at it. Because again, you're not gonna make something perfect. That's okay. That's in the spirit of what Japandi is all about. Okay, my second choice for retailers, and again, this is tricky because I do think that this is not necessarily a style that makes sense for mass market products. But I would say focusing on really sort of local businesses, those small local stores are more likely to shop or to buy products and carry items from your small local artists as well. So a really good example here in Vancouver, there's a shop called Old Faithful. It's in Gastown if you're from Vancouver. They also ship throughout North America, but you know, find a place that maybe works in your local community. But Old Faithful, it just is, I just love their stuff, and it produces a lot of stuff that's really kind of Japandi. It's kind of in this sort of hipster neighborhood. You know the one, like, you know those types of shops. I'm sure you've got one fairly close maybe to where you live. And they just have really beautiful, exquisite pieces. And again, they work with smaller retailers or they work with smaller producers that are not going to necessarily be in the West Elms of the world, but that's okay because again, you're spending a little bit more, but you're buying a lot less, and you're really supporting sort of local artists that are in your own community. Okay, but I do have another couple of like retail options because I understand I'm just like going into all these sort of handcrafted small local places and that might not be helpful. So I do want to give you another couple. One that really comes to mind is Muji. So Muji is sort of a Japanese retailer. It's very strange because they sell like housewares, but then they also sell clothing, which sort of weirds me out. But I do think that their housewares or their home decor For really feels very Japandi. It's very, very light. They do have a lot of things that maybe they're not necessarily perfectly round or perfectly shaped, but there are lots of Mujis around. I have a couple that are in my local area. You might have some near you. Specializes in a lot of Japanese wares, and pretty much everything is neutral. Like, it's hard pressed to find a color in that whole shop. Everything is very like white or cream or beige or brown, and it probably fits with the color palette that you've designed for your Japandi space. So definitely a really cool retailer for you to check out. And then my last retailer that I want to talk about is Rove Concepts. So Rove Concepts is a retailer that I believe they ship all over North America. It's online only, but they specialize a lot in things like really low beds, things like the wishbone chair, things that just really sort of fit with the Japandi style. They sell a lot of beautiful furniture, and I think they're a really, really solid option for a Japandi space. That's it for me for today, you guys. If you're interested in this video and you want to learn more about Japandi, I also think that you should really be interested in the Scandi video that I already did. So I'm going to link that right here for you to check out, and I will see you all in the next video. Thanks. Bye.